And I'd like to start by introducing you then to Don Jones, who's going to come and join us on stage. And Don is the Chief Digital Officer of the Scripps Translational Science Institute. He has really been a digital health expert for many, many years. And in fact, for 11 of them, he led the wireless health strategy for Qualcomm and founded its healthcare division. And he's also the founder and chairman of the Wireless Life Sciences Alliance, and working with the X Prize Foundation and Qualcomm CEO. He conceived the $10 million Qualcomm X Prize, Tricorder X Prize, which is a global competition for a consumer device which makes medical diagnosis. So this is a very impressive background that you have in digital health, Don, and we're really thrilled to have you with us today to share all this. You also won a prize, I should say, in 2014 as the Digital Health Innovator of the Year, which is a great feat. So thank you, Don. If you can take us through a little bit where we stand with digital health and give us a little bit of an intro and a backdrop here to our discussion.
Thank you very much. I come to you all the way from California, where I work with Eric Topol, to share a little bit of our vision and a little bit of what's happening around the world, and especially in the United States, on digital health and the digital patient. The digital patient and digital health is just a subset of the Internet of Things, of which we expect by 2020 to have 50 billion connected devices. Everything from medical devices to cars to obviously the phones and tablets and computer devices that you're already familiar with. But we're on that trajectory. We're likely to hit that trajectory, and really the consumers in the world are going to expect things to be connected. And included in that connectivity are the elements of your body. These are just some of the areas where we have sensors that we keep track of and use at Scripps. We do genomics research and we do digital health clinical research, and we train physicians as clinical researchers at Scripps. And this is one way we keep track of the different sensors that we can take advantage of. And the reason this is all happening is because there's a cost shift that can occur. When you move the point of care from the healthcare facility into home or to the patient away from the healthcare facilities, you can lower the cost. And it is that cost shift that's the opportunity that folks are most after. And that is attracting a huge amount of investment. This year alone, the run rate right now for venture capital is over $8 billion, more than twice what it is for the last 2 years alone. And right now, we expect this run rate to be hit. So we're seeing more money go into digital health than we are into biopharma at this point. So this is a big area. And we're seeing a blurring between consumer health and wellness and fitness apps and the healthcare apps. And this blurring is going to continue. I'm going to show you a couple examples where very early blurring of the lines. But the same sensors are being used in medical apps as they are in fitness and wellness apps. And we're seeing some of the big brands come out, like the Ralph Lauren Polo Tech shirts. Another example is the Mio fitness application. And the Mio fitness application is very different than other fitness applications because it uses clinically backed research to support the way it delivers a score. If you maintain your activity level at 100, which is a algorithmic-driven number that comes from your heart rate and your activity levels and your heart rate variability, if you maintain it at 100 constantly, then the research from the Hunt study from the University of Norway suggests you'll live over 10 years longer if you're under 50, 3 years longer if you're over 50. So very different way of creating a user interface and a user experience for the consumer. Plus, it changes the paradigm. You can bank your what they call pi, so that if you're active and go over 100, you can become inactive for a while your pi falls back down to 100, and then you can work it back up again. So it changes the concept of from walking or taking steps into just maintaining that minimum threshold of 100. But here's something that just happened, literally on April 6th. A patient presented in atrial fibrillation. The physicians wanted to know how long the patient was in AF. The patient could not respond how long with confidence, so they were questioning, do we cardioconvert or not? The decision to cardioconvert was made by taking the patient's Fitbit and looking to see what the heart rate was and when it occurred. And as it turned out, the patient had been in AF for over 6 hours, and they went ahead and cardioverted. So this just was reported in the news. Obviously not an intended claim of a Fitbit. But the most important device we all have is the phone in our pocket. And one of the most recent research studies says we all look at our phones 150 times. The caption says, with the cone on his head, "It keeps me from looking at my phone every 2 seconds." This is obviously a problem we all have. And it's going to continue to be a problem and built on in the sense that we're going to add more and more things, from the Internet of Things to be connected to our phone and to the Internet of Medical Things. So you're going to begin to hear that term, Internet of Medical Things, as more and more things come on that are medical. One of the very first devices is a LiveCore, which I carry on my phone. It turns my phone into an electrocardiogram. And 6 years ago, my own son, when he was 15 years old, used this device when he was having a tachycardia event to call the emergency room, send his ECG and his medical record to the emergency nurse, and say, based on Google Maps, that they was going to be arriving in 35 minutes, and please have my adenosine IV ready when we arrive. So the ER doc had the diagnosis, had the medical history, had the evidence in the form of the ECG, all before he arrived. And he also demanded the therapy, and he knew what the therapy was. That was a 15-year-old with no training, but I figured out how to use this device in order to accomplish therapy. You heard we created the X Prize. 134 teams from around the world have been competing in that. We're down to the final 7. The prize will be awarded in next January. This is a device that in the hands of a consumer with no additional help can make 15 different diagnoses. That's the notion of the X Prize. The reason Qualcomm was interested in pushing the concept of a medical tricorder forward is they knew many, many tricorders could exist in the marketplace. And they wanted people to be thinking about how handheld medical devices could diagnose, triage, manage therapies, etc. And so this was their way of beginning to push that into the marketplace. And we're beginning to see tricorders. This is the Scanadu tricorder, which is currently in a clinical trial with 8,000 participants. Scripps is running it. This is a tricorder that measures SpO2, respiratory rate, heart rate, blood pressure, all in a device for less than $200. It's held up to your temporal lobe, and in 30 seconds gets all of those measurements, including the single lead ECG. This is an upgrade to the mercury thermometer in the medicine cabinet, and there are many tricorders like this on the way. This one also does urinalysis through a separate accessory, and then using the camera phone does the urinalysis laboratory work, and they're expanding their list of capabilities. This is a breast exam device that's used based on a cellular phone chip. This can be used, it uses pressure sensors, it's non-radiographic, it's FDA approved, it can be used by physicians today. It was actually designed to be used by consumers. It was designed to be able to be sold for less than $400. And clinically, the clinical trials show that it is actually more sensitive in terms of reading than mammography. So you can see how tricorders can take on many forms. And this form here takes on the form of being able to do the classic ear exam for otitis media, for an earache for the young child. But this particular device also does heart sounds, lung sounds, ECG, heart rate, body temperature, SpO2, and several other physiological moments from Tyto. So another form of upgrade to mom's mercury thermometer in the medicine cabinet. The apparel industry is now rapidly moving. MAS Holdings is one of the largest manufacturers of clothing in the world and the manufacturer of much of the smart clothing that has come into the marketplace. I'll draw your attention to the bottom right. That is a sock for a newborn infant that measures heart rate variability, and SpO2. It can be put right on the infant from a company called Owlet. Even Silicon Valley is involved. Hollywood has found out about digital health, and it is part of the storyline.
Would you be interested in a device that links to your smartphone and lets you know even before it happens whether you're having a panic attack or a heart attack?
Yeah.
Okay, here's how panic attack works. You wear this on your finger all day and it tracks your vitals. Or, if that's too embarrassing, there's also a Bluetooth suppository, and that goes right where you think it goes. And that comes with a retrieval kit.
So let's talk a little bit about what Pharma is doing in the digital area. This is a survey that was just done recently about pharma executive attitudes about how digital health will impact the pharma industry. In 2013, they expected digital health, the big tall line, is about enhancing the value of the products. In 2015, it was about extending the value of the products. This is a perception of the industry. And in 2020, the perception is that it will actually help invent new value among the products. So let's take a little survey of what folks are doing. We're seeing augmented reality and, for that matter, virtual reality being applied to medical devices and to pharmaceuticals. Here's a case where augmented reality is being applied to the pharmaceutical product. This is Johnson & Johnson's app platform to allow prescribing of apps to patients. So this allows a curated library of apps to be used and prescribed to patients, and allows the interaction of consumer wearables and consumer wearable information to be merged together with the other medical information that can be used by the healthcare professional. In Novartis's case, a few examples. Novartis has formed a joint venture and investment arm with DRX Capital, investing $100 million with Qualcomm. They've also partnered with Qualcomm Life to use the Qualcomm Life infrastructure for its clinical trials, and many other partnerships. And the key here from this slide is partnerships. What we're seeing as the telco world and the healthcare world and the pharmaceutical world come together is we're seeing the need for partnerships, because the core competencies don't all exist in one entity. And that's what's playing out in these scenarios. Pfizer tends to be focusing on apps, companion apps for drugs, companion apps for therapies. Lots of different combinations there. At GSK, we're seeing a number of different activities, from connected inhalers, smart patches through partnerships, and through other partnerships, sensors for neurostimulation, where the actual sensor is the drug rather than necessarily the drug. So turning the human body into its own drug-making capability, so to speak. AstraZeneca is also very focused on connected inhalers. Connected inhalers are a big theme. There's probably 7 different efforts around the world currently on different companies working on connected inhalers. And you'll see that about both brand drugs as well as generic drugs, when you see Teva working with connected inhalers to enhance the value and make it more valuable for the generics through their recent acquisition of Gecko. And Amgen tends to be working on connected injectors, drug delivery mechanisms that have the ability to follow the drug, dose the drug, and report on the use of the drug as one of their key themes. This is an interesting slide. This slide shows how physicians in the US currently perceive drug companies from the perspective of their level of digital participation. So whether or not you feel this is right or not, this is what physicians think the drug industry's activities currently look like. And on the horizontal line is the patient or consumer traction line. In order to get data from the patient and get it into the cloud and into places it's usable, you typically need some kind of a hub. Sometimes that can be the phone, but sometimes it's a different kind of hub. We have hubs now announced at Google. It's not on the market yet, but it's announced. Qualcomm Life has been an early adopter and provider in the marketplace, and many companies are using the Qualcomm Life product. Amazon, through an Echo product, has a radio in Echo. It's not yet advertised as a hub. Once they turn that radio on, it will be a hub. And then Abbott has a number of products. These are just some of the hubs that are out there. There's many more that essentially can aggregate data from devices and get it up onto the cloud. And just this morning, the Amazon Echo was announced in partnership with Boston Children's Hospital as a way to ask about medical conditions of kids from your home. So you can talk to the Amazon Echo and ask medical questions about pediatrics. It was just announced, as I said, this morning. So this raises a question. And a lot of people think doctors will be prescribing apps, and they will. But what you're really going to see is apps prescribing doctors. As patients get access to technology and they find out what they need, and then they get recommendations regarding which physician to reach out to. We're also seeing ecosystems being built. This is the Dexcom ecosystem around a continuous blood glucose sensor, which is about the size of a large coin. It's worn on the abdomen. But this sensor now talks to phones, watches, insulin pumps, works off third-party software. And what I'm showing here is that this is a medical system that can be assembled by a patient where all the components were not submitted to the regulators at the same time. This is an ecosystem put together, much like you would put accessories around your phone together. These are all approved devices, but they were not approved together, and yet you can use them today in the care of diabetic patients. Same thing's happening in the inhaler space, where we're taking connected inhalers, this happens to be Propeller Health's inhaler, combining it with data from the weather sources in the US, the NOAA weather, which is the National Oceanographic weather source, and Google Maps to be able to combine data together to find out where sources of pollution occur that might trigger asthmatic attacks. We're seeing ecosystems by companies like Philips, who are bringing together small ultrasound and using Amazon Web Services to be able to share and store those images in a medical device model, which is very different. Instead of buying the ultrasound, you rent it, $199 a month. Very, very different, trying to get the ultrasound into every provider's pocket. And then Apple is very much involved in getting data into patients' hands and getting the data from the patient's personal wearable systems into the electronic healthcare record systems using HealthKit and ResearchKit. And a few weeks ago, they just launched CareKit, which is for therapy management. You will see this pattern reverse in the not-too-distant future, where Apple will suck down information from the electronic health records to the individual, so the individual will have their medical record in their pocket and will be given the opportunity to share that record or portions of it with app developers that offer an app that they want to get a value proposition from. And that value proposition may be commercial, like please find me where to get my drugs at a less expensive price, or it may be medical. Please take a look at my record and make recommendations. So you're seeing Apple gain a lot of traction in this space as they begin to bridge between the consumer, the healthcare professional, and the healthcare professional infrastructure. Probably the biggest takeaway on data is the fact that freeing data, freeing the friction of the data, getting data into patients' hands has the potential to create a great deal of economic activity and a great deal of savings in the healthcare. It's estimated that $140 billion can be generated in the EU and $300 to $450 billion in the US by allowing the data to free much more freely to the patient. So I hope that's a nice overview and will help get today's session started. Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce you what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. Couldn't have hoped for a better intro to sort of set the scene. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that you came and spoke on this subject, and it just dawned on me as you were presenting this how, in fact, this exponential growth I was referring to is happening, because it's absolutely astounding how advanced things have become even in the last 2 or 3 years.
Not only is there the digitization of the existing infrastructure, electronic health records, and the digitization of existing electronic medical devices, but there's 5,000 new digital health companies in the US, and little Finland, with 4.5 million people, has over 500. So the amount of activity in this space is just huge. In fact, 50 out of the 50 Fortune 500 companies, 3 years ago, only 14 had a healthcare offering. Today, 38 do, and all of them are digital in one way or another.
Wow. It's amazing. And yet, you know, as we mentioned, we are facing, you know, still a number of challenges where we're going to talk a little bit. We had a workshop yesterday, actually, on digital health. And towards the end of our discussion here today, we'll restitute a little bit of some of the findings and the discussions that we had. But I love to bring, you know, still this one and this interoperability issue. And it struck me when you were talking about the ecosystem, you know, when it's self-contained like this, you can deal with it, but there's still so many problems that we face with that. What's your quick take on that? And we'll discuss probably this throughout our panel here today, but...
Well, I guess my high-level input is that there's two forces happening simultaneously. One is top-down, that's government-driven interoperability standards. In some places it's just discussions, but it's essentially the government saying, here's what we have to do to get interoperability. And then we're seeing companies like Apple and Google actually come in with commercial operations, which are actually delivering interoperability. I frankly think Apple's going to drive more interoperability in the near term than the governments will.
And being the top down, yeah. And one of the things that we mentioned that, you know, the whole big data, of course, story, but, you know, things like even the Ebola crisis, that hit, that was a real wake-up call, for example, in Africa on this issue. I often use in my presentations this fantastic chart that USA did in the height of the crisis in Liberia, where they wanted to use data, and the technology was there, the mobile phones and whatnot, and yet none of the systems that were in place could talk to each other. There were no standards. So the data, this is what we refer to when we mention the issue and the challenge of interoperability.